W2 figures. Fulgencio Batista. Living from 1901 to 1973, the wartime president of Cuba passed away from a heart attack in exile. Batista aligned Cuba with the Allied powers during World War II. He later seized absolute control as a dictator, until he was overthrown by the Cuban Revolution, spending his final years in Spain. Galeazzo Ciano. Living from 1903 to 1944, the Italian foreign minister was executed by a fascist firing squad. Ciano was the son-in-law of dictator Benito Mussolini. However, when the war turned disastrous, Ciano voted to strip Mussolini of his absolute powers. Convicted of treason by his own father-in-law, he was executed. Arthur Seyss-Inquart. Living from 1892 to 1946, the Nazi administrator was executed by hanging at Nuremberg. Seyss-Inquart facilitated the annexation of Austria and later served as the brutal governor of the occupied Netherlands, overseeing mass deportations. He was found guilty of war crimes and executed. Reinhard Heydrich. Spanning from 1904 to 1942, the high-ranking SS official died of severe blood infection following an assassination plot. Known as one of the darkest figures in the regime, Heydrich was ambushed in Prague by British-trained Czech resistance fighters, succumbing to infected wounds days later. Vidkun Quisling. Living from 1887 to 1945, the collaborationist ruler of Norway was executed by a firing squad for high treason. Quisling assisted the Nazi invasion of his own country and headed the puppet government. His actions were so widely condemned that his name became a permanent international synonym for a traitor. Isoroku Yamamoto. Living from 1884 to 1943, the commander of the combined Japanese fleet was killed when his aircraft was shot down. Yamamoto was the strategic planner behind the Pearl Harbor operation. American military intelligence successfully intercepted and decoded his flight itinerary, leading to a targeted aerial ambush. Joseph Goebbels. Spanning from 1897 to 1945, the Nazi propaganda minister committed suicide alongside his family. A fanatical follower of Hitler, Goebbels stepped into the bunker leadership role for just one day. Following Hitler's death, he and his wife lethally poisoned their 6 children before taking their own lives. Hermann Göring. Living from 1893 to 1946, the chief of the German Air Force committed suicide hours before his scheduled hanging. Convicted of crimes against humanity at the Nuremberg trials, the top-ranking Nazi smuggled a cyanide capsule into his prison cell, cheating the gallows at the final moment. Heinrich Himmler. Living from 1900 to 1945, the chief architect of the Holocaust committed suicide using a hidden cyanide capsule. As head of the notorious SS, Himmler attempted to flee Germany in disguise following the regime's collapse. Captured by British troops, he bit down on the poison during a medical inspection. Georgy Zhukov. Spanning from 1896 to 1974, the highly decorated Soviet marshal died of a heart attack. Zhukov orchestrated the historic defense of Stalingrad and led the ultimate assault on Berlin, hoisting the Soviet flag over the Reichstag. Wary of his massive public popularity, Joseph Stalin sidelined him shortly after the war. Erwin Rommel. Living from 1891 to 1944, the famous German commander known as the Desert Fox was forced to commit suicide by cyanide. Implicated in a covert military plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler, Rommel was offered a choice: face a public show trial and endanger his family, or take his own life quietly. Bernard Montgomery. Living from 1887 to 1976, Britain's most famous field marshal died peacefully in his sleep at age 88. Montgomery achieved historic renown by defeating Erwin Rommel's forces at the Battle of El Alamein, securing a vital turning point for the Allies in the North African campaign. Douglas MacArthur. Living from 1880 to 1964, the legendary five-star general of the Pacific Theater passed away from liver cirrhosis. Forced to evacuate the Philippines early in the war, he famously promised, "I shall return." He fulfilled that vow, liberated the islands, and officially accepted Japan's surrender aboard the USS Missouri. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Spanning from 1890 to 1969, the supreme Allied commander in Europe died of heart failure. Eisenhower successfully coordinated the massive D-Day invasion of Normandy, securing the liberation of Western Europe. His monumental wartime prestige later propelled him to serve 2 terms as U.S. President. George S. Patton. Living from 1885 to 1945, America's most aggressive armored commander died from injuries sustained in a minor vehicle collision. Famous for leading the Third Army across Europe, Patton survived years of frontline combat only to suffer fatal paralysis after a road accident in occupied Germany. Mao Zedong. Living from 1893 to 1976, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party died following successive heart attacks. Mao formed a temporary wartime alliance with Chiang Kai-shek to resist the Japanese invasion. After Japan's surrender, the Civil War resumed, ending with Mao establishing the People's Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek. Spanning from 1887 to 1975, the leader of the Chinese nationalist forces died of kidney and heart failure. During World War II, he led China through a brutal defense against Imperial Japanese forces. Following a post-war civil defeat by communist forces, he relocated his government to Taiwan, ruling it for decades. Charles de Gaulle. Living from 1890 to 1970, the leader of the Free French forces died suddenly from a ruptured blood vessel. Refusing to accept France's surrender to Hitler, de Gaulle fled to London to organize global resistance. He returned a national hero, later serving as President of the French Republic. Henri-Philippe Pétain. Living from 1856 to 1951, the World War I French hero turned World War II collaborator died in prison at age 95. After France fell, Pétain headed the collaborationist Vichy regime. Convicted of high treason after liberation, his death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment on a remote island. Subhas Chandra Bose. Living from 1897 to 1945, the prominent Indian nationalist leader died of third-degree burns. Seeking Axis support to liberate India from British rule, Bose's overloaded plane crashed mysteriously in Taiwan on August 18, 1945. He succumbed to his injuries in a military hospital, leaving behind a historical mystery. Clement Attlee. Living from 1883 to 1967, Attlee passed away from pneumonia. In a stunning political twist, he defeated Winston Churchill in the 1945 general election just as the war was concluding. He represented Britain at the Potsdam Conference and later oversaw the independence of Pakistan and India in 1947. Neville Chamberlain. Spanning from 1869 to 1940, the British Prime Minister died of bowel cancer shortly after the war began. Famous for his pre-war appeasement policy and signing the Munich Agreement with Hitler, he resigned in disgrace when the peace failed, passing away just months into the global conflict. Harry S. Truman. Living from 1884 to 1972, Truman passed away due to multiple organ failure. Ascending to the presidency after Roosevelt's sudden death, he made one of the most consequential decisions in human history by authorizing the deployment of atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing Japan's surrender. Emperor Hirohito. Ruling from 1901 to 1989, Japan's wartime emperor passed away from cancer decades after the conflict. While many military leaders faced execution, the Allied administration chose to preserve Hirohito as a constitutional monarch to stabilize post-war Japan, allowing him to live a long life. Hideki Tojo. Living from 1884 to 1948, the Japanese Prime Minister was executed by hanging for historic war crimes. Tojo was the mastermind behind the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Though he attempted suicide before arrest, he survived, stood trial at the Tokyo tribunals, and was sentenced to death in 1948. Benito Mussolini. Spanning from 1883 to 1945, the fascist dictator of Italy met a violent end by public execution. Attempting to escape to Switzerland as his regime collapsed, he was captured by Italian partisans. On April 28, 1945, he was shot, and his body was later hung upside down in a Milan public square before a massive crowd. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Spanning from 1882 to 1945, the American president died of a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. Roosevelt successfully mobilized the United States after the Pearl Harbor attack and orchestrated the grand strategy. Tragically, he passed away just weeks before witnessing the final surrender of Nazi Germany. Winston Churchill. Living from 1874 to 1965, Britain's iconic wartime prime minister died from a stroke at the age of 90. When Western Europe fell to Hitler, Churchill refused to surrender, rallying the British Empire with powerful speeches. He outlived his rivals and passed away as a celebrated statesman. Joseph Stalin. Living from 1878 to 1953, the absolute ruler of the Soviet Union died of a sudden stroke. Although Stalin led the USSR to victory over the Axis powers, his domestic regime was defined by fear. 8 years after the war, he suffered a massive stroke alone in his villa, where terrified guards delayed medical help for hours out of pure fear. Adolf Hitler. Living from 1889 to 1945, his final chapter ended in suicide inside an underground bunker. As Soviet forces advanced deep into Berlin, Hitler realized defeat was absolute. On April 30, 1945, he took his own life to avoid capture. Following his strict orders, his remains were immediately burned to prevent enemy desecration. Which leader's final chapter surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you appreciate objective history, like this video and subscribe to Timeline Diaries for more untold chapters.